Is this thing on straight? Am I getting it? Okay, here we go. It's May 21st, 2022, and it's about 8:40 at night for Saturday night. Weaver, John C., Roseman, California. Normally I'd say evening, fellow zombies. I've gotten hit with a lot of emotional zombies, actually emotional tsunamis right now that, it's gotten me affected a bit. This video would be addressed to the cast and crew of Saving Mr. Banks, not to mention the Walt Disney Studios, Burbank, California. To the spirit of Walt Disney and Mrs. Travers. And also to Tom Hanks and Emma Thompson. Best performance I've ever seen that makes a grown man cry. And not for the reasons that you think of. I'll probably address this over to corporate somewhere in the deeper bowels of the Walt Disney Company in Burbank somewhere. It also has to deal with the amusement parks and the company and everything else regarding what Walt had created and that he still shares with us, despite whatever people may have said for other things he may or may not have done or contributed to. I still believe in the part of the spirit of Walt Disney that actually cared about people. And I still want to hold on to that belief. I had just finished watching on Disney Plus the film of Saving Mr. Banks. And I would counter Mr. Disney, my dog, eating. I would counter Mr. Disney and Miss Travers. It wasn't exactly saving Mr. Banks, it was saving all of us. For we are Mr. Banks, and we are also Mrs. P.J. Travers. Those who have shared and held on to a figure or possibly a representation of something that meant a great deal to us, that we loved a great, great a value, that we could never count how high or feel how depth of it. And watching the film was a particular treat of seeing the performances of Mr. Hanks and Miss Thomas. And I was torn away by seeing the history of Miss Travers and trying to see why couldn't the adult communicate what happened to Mr. Disney. Watched it all the way through and never explained that portion of it that she kept hidden. If she had explained, that would have been giving something more of her away, and she was being portrayed as a guarded woman with a past that she was not proud of, but it was a past that she lived in. And because of her upbringing during that time, it was an opposite of what Walt Disney was trying to show in us, that we still had a kid to save inside of ourselves. And yet her kid was so wounded it had to take a creation of a Mrs. Mary Poppins, or Miss Mary Poppins, or just Mary Poppins, however you want to look at it and pronounce it, to somehow save the kids, but not exactly saving the kids, as in the little ones. It would save the kids and the adults, the child spirit inside of all of us. When I saw the film originally, not Saving Mr. Banks, but the Mary Poppins films, yeah, back in the '70s when they were running it, and then they put them on cable, the VHS, and the DVDs and the Blu-rays. I felt wonderful film, wonderful imagination, creative writer, but there was no backstory that I was understanding because I didn't see the backstory then. But as I've seen it in the film of Saving Mr. Banks, and when you have situations in life change you in many ways, shape, or form, you begin to understand other things in a different viewpoint. Sometimes it's hard to let go. It's hard to let go of the past because we are so wrapped up around it with the trials and tribulations and the grief. Walt, the character, never explained to Miss Travers about when his family died out. Did he carry the grief, the depression? He had to carry on, he had to carry forward. And growing up the way I had, I'm still questioning that. I have had a lot of people die in my lifetime. I know keeping the grief and the pain inside for so long usually stunts a person's personality sometimes. And that I was never the most friendliest person, but I was just the most isolated of them all. I have a picture of a family that went to Disneyland. Photographer was me. And in the picture was a mother and a brother. Part of the core family to the photographer, which is me. They, within the past 10 years, have been long gone. My brother, the most recent in 2018, Ma back in 2013. But the picture was done back in 1990s. Enjoying a day celebrating my mother's birthday. And it was quite a day for my mother. The picture that you see on the cabinet on my left, that was taken in 2002 when we were still all together. My brother David, my mother Mary Ann. She always did like the name Mary Ann. It gives a fit her personality. She was stuck with the name Eleanor, and that was just too formal and regal. I guess she would have had conversations with Miss Travers concerning about her upbringing as well. But over there, the one thing my mother never had never asked for one thing, to really supplant and suppress her dignity, even though she was a fun loving woman, as the ears that I wear. Both of them, both ears are for them. It's kind of a funny way to look at the ears because they're on a flexible metal that are, it's stiff enough where it could fit on the head tightly enough to a point, and yet it connects both ears, and this can fit a face. Well, to a point anyway. Especially if one actually has earpieces in with a mic attached to it, so it's a little difficult. Excuse me 1 second. You know, at times I feel like Miss Travers, thinking that every time I get on these vids I keep doing for my own channel, talking about my own personal experiences of going through grief, depression, and everything else, that I have to be dignified. And in the times when I'm not dignified is usually when I'm pouring everything else out because I'm trying to satisfy. And sometimes it just, I try to understand how Miss Travers is acting and reacting to a lot of things. I tried to look, I tried to hear. We're seeing a young girl crossing paths with reality and fantasy at the same time. We're not seeing the characters, but we're seeing a father trying to portray different characters to entertain his girl. And she sees him falling and failing and dying. And the thing of it is, it's still a gut punch for me too. I can't tell you how many people I've seen that way. I've seen them in different recovery halls. They all try to accept reality, but to have a spirit of an imagination of a kid, and it still has to deal with the reality. At times you wonder if they're special enough to get past the malady. And sometimes creative people always need the crutch. Doesn't matter which particular crutch it is. Even Mrs. Travers has one. Her own character. It's only when she's breaking down and accepting things at that moment of pure childhood innocence that she was able to enjoy something. But portions of it still reminded her, and she still wanted to contain that ever so stiff upper lip. Kind of reminded me of my family and me sometimes. I had creativity. I built things with Lego when I was a kid. Who didn't? I wrote things, but not very good, not very well as a kid. Growing up as a teenager to a young adult, I tried to write. I still have stories I still save. Some I haven't touched in a hell of a long while, and I keep wondering how come I haven't seen them again. I wonder, how am I doing? In a way, I can understand how she felt about her characters. But my characters always are telling me that they need to be out there. They need to be out there, just like Mary Poppins is. I understand about fear, but the problem is understanding is one thing, dealing with it and trying to shake it off is another thing. Too much of a well used, well worn out coat, more than outlived its usefulness, and you cling on to it like it's a life preserver, and you're still drowning in the waters. Sometimes I have to look at it that way when I'm seeing other things, and I can tell you when I was watching the Saving Mr. Banks, emotional triggers were kicked in. They were triggered left and right, and then what happens when you deal with grief, when you deal with pain, loss, and sorrow, when you deal with emotions so hard and harsh that they are worse than getting caught in a riptide. You are caught in a tsunami, and it takes all your effort just to get past it before you're crawling on the shore gasping for breath, and the after effects are the depression that's left afterwards. What I do in my own video log is talk about that. When I see the picture of my family at Disneyland, pictures like this should be triggering that kind of response, and yet it doesn't. Because I remember her with Pooh. I remember Mama taking a picture with me and Captain Hook. I think I still have that picture somewhere. I'd seen her go through a character breakfast. There was a time on that same day that we went over to the Blue Bayou to get lunch. We already had put our reservation in. And everywhere she went, my mother, the cast members were wishing her happy birthday. Freaked her out everywhere. She always kept hitting my brother. That's what happens when he mentioned the thing over to the ticket booth without my mother and me hearing it. Otherwise, I'd be complicit in the whole thing and enjoying it like crazy. Disneyland brought a lot of memories. Between 99 and 2007, my brother and I did the New Year's Eve for several years when we could afford it. We'd rent a motel outside the park. Park the car, keep our gear in there. Go over to Disneyland, get the hand stamped, get in the park, stay for a few hours, come back outside, check into the motel, sleep for a few hours, go out to downtown Disney, grab a bite to eat, and go back into the park again and celebrate until the New Year's. Go back to the motel, sleep it off, and head back home. A little short tradition in our lifetimes. I just wish we had taken pictures at the time, but that was really done on a part. Could have gotten cameras, taken pictures of everything, but we didn't. The thing of it, what I kept as memories is getting the pins, collectible pins. I held memories in those collectible pins. Had to sell them off years later because we needed the money, and now I'm still scrambling to get some of those pins back because they still held memories. Those years, they were special. Memories are special, and I'm grateful that I spent the time with my brother and my mother over at Disneyland. Apologies, real life kicks in and you have to take care of things. And the things sometimes take more precedent than anything else. Work does, especially when you turn into a caregiver and caregive for both the people that you love before you lose them. Within the past 10 years, I did that for Mom and David. Which makes it hard for me to say about going back over to Disneyland. I understand Miss Travers and the character having her not understanding fluff and stuff and dealing with the biting cold reality sometimes. And she just needs to lower the barriers a little bit to understand why Disneyland is so special. I know that facades can bring some happiness a little bit. You see the facades and you're like, wow, that's good stuff that they got there. And then you see the reality, what's the making of, and why it works the way it works. And for me, I had worked at a movie studio at one time, tour operation, no, not tour operations, but just merchandise, as a younger man than I am now. One of the competitors. And then movie magic was always magic. I don't care what kind of props and facades we put up there, it was still movie magic and you still had to feel part of it. Much like the stories they would tell in any of the parks, if they could. Disney tells a story of itself. The time of the 1900s, 1890s to 1910, where Dixie Jazz was kicking into play. And you can hear the jazz players on the instruments. In Main Street, I'm taken back to those times, listening to the music of Scott Joplin. Even though the quartets that they have up and down Main Street singing their wares, and also in New Orleans Square, I still feel that kind of magic. But Disneyland was also supposed to be bringing out the hope and the fun of the kids for the future. What could be achieved, what can be achieved, if you just let imagination run wild. And for the adults, well, the collectibles were one thing, if they look at the merchandise point of view. Or just suspend belief just for a couple of seconds and just try to drink something in that made the park special, that made something of watching the movies special, of the adventures that they presented to us growing up as kids, of your daring heroes challenging the environment and coming out barely, barely beaten up, but they're still beaten up, but they'll still live. And some of the characters that never make it. And of course, you've got to mourn for them, but the rest of them, they were still there, dealing and trying to fight for survival and fight for a future. You had to suspend everything when you're walking into parks and just try to enjoy the fair-like attitude when you go to a small fair and you see all the rides, and you see the lights, and you hear the music in the background, and you happen to go to your food venues, you feel like you just want to live in that moment, and sometimes it's all that's worth it. Even to capture a moment on a still camera or digital, and it lives as long as the memory's still there, as long as it holds out, as long as the zeros and ones are not going to be replaced. But to see a movie that turns your guts inside out, that makes you cry because you understand more, because of how you relate to the characters more and more, that's got to be something there. And in the movie, Malt did everything he could. He even tried to understand where she was coming from. But the thing of it is, I just wish Miss Travers had related to Walt why. And that was the thing that she never did. She couldn't explain to him why she was the way she was. Why Mary Poppins had to be the way Travers viewed her as such. But in a way she did. Because she didn't want to lose that image. She didn't want to lose that comfort. She didn't want to lose that zone. And that's what it meant to her. A home, a feeling of safety and security, a place, a time, an epoch. We all crawl to it. We all want to be safe because the outside world is too damn scary, even for the young kids. You needed someone like Mary Poppins to take care of them all, to the kid inside of us. And maybe Walt understood that more. Why he went as he did to the lengths he could to convince Miss Travers. To convince us all. Every time we stepped into Disneyland, we were giving our own Travers to Walt. And Walt was saying to us, here not lie be dragons here, but here is the frontier of your imagination. Here is where you're safe. Here is where you're home. Here is a place where you can be yourself and be your kid again. Let me take away the pain. Let me take away the grief. And let me instill hope. Let me instill faith. As much of a con man he may seem to be for other people, in some ways he was still trying to reach to the inner child of us all. He wasn't the Pied Piper, but even though some people may have considered him as a Pied Piper. Pied Piper wanted money for a recompense concerning about getting rid of the rats out of a town. What are the rats that we have inside of us that the Pied Piper's trying to get rid of? Or out of the town we exist in? And is the town ready to pay for our liberation? Did the Pied Piper actually have a heart inside? We see the magic, but we also see the bigger picture of the Disney Corp. So, what is the thing that keeps triggering the emotions inside of us? Is it the illusion? Is it the actual feeling of our kid being reminded of things we went through? You hardly ever see anybody cry at Disneyland, except if they're really scared and you're probably real young. But you don't see them as zombies, though. You do see a lot of them just rushing through, just getting through the park. But you see a lot of them take their time and stroll because they want that feeling back inside themselves. They don't want to feel the pain. They don't want to feel the grief. They don't want to feel the agony. They want to feel home. I know this is a long letter, and I'm sorry that it is. But I would ask each of us to be reminded of the things I just discussed. I want to go back to Disneyland. I do. I want to remember my family without the grief, without the pain, without the tears. I want to be able to go down Main Street again and listen to the band if it's still there. The singers would be nice. The jazz singers, yeah. But I want to hear the music. I know one could go on YouTube and listen to the music of decades old of Disneyland. I want to hear it. I want to feel it. I want to smell it. I want to go over there and be reminded why my family and I loved it so and went so many times over there. It was so much of a time. It was so much of a place. Anyway, if I ever get the chance to go back over to Disneyland, I hope to make it a commemoration day and not a commiseration day. Because that place reminded me so many things. Yeah, one time I wanted to see Walt Disney World, but you guys make it so complicated, I swear. So the only simplest thing I know is Disneyland, close by. Transportation would be no problem. That's what trains are invented for. Of course, getting a motel room, that'd probably be on me anyway. But to go in that place again, even to see some old places, but to see the new places. I would hope not to put ashes into the property of Walt. No. But I would hope to meet the ghosts and to tell them I'm okay. I'm okay. For this moment, I'd be okay. Ask me again tomorrow. Ask me again tomorrow. Anyway, this is John Cameron Weaver from Rosamond, California. The armpit of the Antelope Valley in California.